No one in my determination to see net zero by 2050. But will the Secretary of State not agree with me that the right place for solar is on buildings, in domestic buildings, as the question suggests, and across the nation? But what we don't want to see are hundreds of acres of prime agricultural land, such as we're seeing in Wiltshire, currently threatened by vast and unplanned solar farms, which the people simply don't want to see there, particularly post-Ukraine.
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course we want to see an expansion of renewables across the country, but I would just point him to the energy security strategy, which sets out our plan on ensuring that we are seeing more rooftop solar, not just on commercial buildings, but also on public sector property.
Yeah. We now come to Shadow Minister Dr. Alan Whitehead.
The President does indeed acknowledge the tremendous contribution that solar has made and can make to the achievement of our net zero goals. And also I'm sure he acknowledges it's now one of the cheapest and most quickly installed of renewables. So why is the government ignoring its future development, having devastated the industry a few years back by precipitously withdrawing all support for development and now doing nothing to ease the penal planning restrictions on both domestic and ground-mounted solar installations? The President says merely that he expects installations to increase fivefold by 2035, but without any support to allow that expectation to become a reality. Isn't it time that the government took the contribution of solar can make to net zero targets seriously?
Well, Mr. Speaker, respectfully, I disagree with him. I mean, the government is doing an enormous amount on this issue. In the latest CFD auction process, solar is back in. He will know that we've already removed VAT on solar panels to allow installations of residential accommodation. And if he looks at the detail of what's been set out in the energy security strategy, he will see there is going to be a big focus on solar, on wind, and of course nuclear as well.
Caroline Anson.
Question 2, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I will answer questions 2 and 7 together. COP26 was the first such conferences with a significant presence from the private sector, as well as key corporate commitments to tackle climate change. For example, over 7,000 international companies have signed up to the Race to Zero campaign, committing them to reach net zero by 2050 at the latest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to the Met Office, my beautiful constituency of Eastbourne has held the record for sunshine hours recorded in a month since 1911. Arguably, we should be leading the nation in harnessing solar power. To your earlier point, or to his earlier point, we don't have land readily available locally, but we do have, courtesy of 3 commercial and retail parks, acres of rooftops. Can I ask my right honourable friend what work he is doing, and with other departments, to promote feasibility studies to identify untapped potential for solar generation and to promote financial incentives so local businesses in my town can play their part in tackling climate change?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend raised a very important point, and she does indeed have a very beautiful constituency, well worth a visit. She makes a vital point about rooftop solar, and she will know through the energy security strategy that our plan for rooftop solar is to radically simplify planning processes with a consultation on relevant permitted development rights to help support deployment of rooftop solar on commercial premises. And I said we'll also consider the best way to make use of public sector roofs.
David Simmons.
Number 7, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Apologies for the misunderstanding. Local energy companies are often well placed to support small and medium-sized enterprises with the transition to net zero, and local authorities, with their insight into the opportunities for things like solar locally, are best placed to help with that. What assessment has the President made of the opportunities that this model may afford?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right to highlight the role of local energy companies in helping that transition to net zero through the provision of renewable energy. And as an example, I mean, close to my own constituency, we have Reading Hydro. It's a community-financed, built and operated hydro plant, and it's supplying renewable electricity to local business. And of course, I'd be very happy to meet with him, as would the Energy Minister, to discuss this matter further.
Toby Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Isn't the truth that what business has learnt about this government is that it is entirely inconsistent in what it says today compared to what it says tomorrow? And the example of the Minister talking about solar, when only a few years ago the government were cutting feed-in tariffs, which decimated the industry. Isn't what we really need, and isn't what business needs, to know that they have a government with a strategic plan like the Green New Deal that the Labour Party's been talking about, that they can actually make long-term investments and know the government's going to say tomorrow what it says today?
Mr. Speaker, could I just remind the honourable gentleman that we have published a net zero strategy which clearly sets out our long-term plans to create hundreds of thousands of extra jobs, green jobs, get many billions of pounds of private investment in. And I just say to him, one of the reasons that we are not reliant on Russian hydrocarbons is because of the last 10 years we have built the second biggest offshore wind sector in the world, and we want to quintuple the size of that.
Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The only net zero that really matters is the one for planet Earth as a whole. So would he agree with me that there is a real potential that we could shoot ourselves in the foot when it comes to energy-intensive industries in this country? I'm thinking about croppers, paper manufacturer in my constituency who make the paper for the poppies, for Hansard paper, but also paper with medical and military applications. If we tax them too much, if we allow their bills to be so high that they go out of business, all we'll do is export their carbon emissions to other countries. So will he talk to his friend the Energy Secretary so we have help for our energy-intensive industries to be able to support us in the long run?
Well, Mr. Speaker, he will know the government is providing support to energy-intensive industries to help them decarbonise. And he will also know through the COP26 process we have the Breakthroughs agenda, where we are working globally on seeing how we can decarbonise some of the most difficult sectors as well. And so there is a global plan as well as a domestic plan on this.
Teresa Phillips.
Will the President work with the agriculture sector in pursuing his COP goals? Because we have some of the most sustainable farming practices in use anywhere in the world, and many farmers and growers who want to go further in playing their part in protecting nature and safeguarding the climate.
Quite right.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, that my right honourable friend has raised an important point, and the Secretary of State for DEFRA and his ministers are, of course, working on this. But again, at an international level, we are looking to start an agriculture breakthrough as well, so that we can have a global focus on this issue.
SNP spokesperson Deirdre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Facebook promoted ads which contained outright climate falsehoods and scepticism during COP26, and it's reported fossil fuel companies and lobbying groups spent an estimated $574,000 on Facebook ads during the summit, resulting in more than 22 million impressions, many of these directly aimed at undermining efforts to achieve climate progress. Would the President agree the best way such businesses could help in the fight against climate change is to put the planet before their profits and come down hard on the climate naysayers? And can he tell us what actions he's been taking to address this?
Well, Mr. Speaker, one thing I would say to you is that we saw at COP26 the business community for, I think, probably the first time at a COP coming together in force and making commitments to tackle climate change. They, of course, now need to deliver on those. On the Pacific issue that she raises, happily write to her separately.
Steve Bryan.
Question number 3, please, sir.
President.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I will answer questions 3 and 12 together. Countries made significant commitments at COP26 on emissions reductions, on finance to support developing nations, on adaptation, loss and damage. We are continuing to press countries to deliver on their promises, and together with the COP27 presidency, Egypt, I'll be co-chairing a meeting of a representative group of ministers from around the world next month, hosted by the Danish government, to take stock of progress on delivery of the Glasgow Climate Pact.
Steve Bryan.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for coming to Winchester early this month to my Ask the Minister session, which was attended by hundreds of my constituents and school children from many schools across the patch, including Peter Symonds College, and for answering their questions so elegantly and openly. I'm sure he would agree that the young people that were there from those schools were so positive and care so much and are searching questions as they should, but are also very optimistic about this presidency and about this whole agenda. What more can we do to empower them, to make them really be able to push forward this agenda during our presidency year?
Mr. Speaker, I very much enjoyed my visit to Winchester, and may I commend my honourable friend for all the work he does in his local community. And of course, we had some excellent questions from the very many young people who were at the event, and they were positive as well in their outlook. I would just point out to him that in the planning for COP26 and in the country visits that I continue to make, listening to the views of young people has been absolutely invaluable, and indeed it's why in the Glasgow Climate Pact we have urged countries to actively involve young people in climate change processes.
Scott Benson.
Question number 12, Mr. As the Minister knows, the UK accounts for only 1% of global CO2 emissions, yet the steps we are taking to combat climate change will cost businesses and the government untold billions. Does the Minister agree that whilst the UK does what is perceived to be the right thing, it is highly likely that other nations will miss climate targets and that the enormous expense and impact upon our own economic competitiveness will all be in vain?
Mr. Speaker, tackling climate change is the right thing to do. It's also economically the smart thing to do. It's why at COP26 we had $130 trillion of private sector money signed up to net zero. It's why as a presidency we've managed to persuade 90% of the global GDP to sign up to net zero. It's why our net zero strategy talks about many hundreds of thousands of jobs and billions of pounds of inward investments. He talks about costs. I just say to my honourable friend, look at what the OBR estimates as the unmitigated cost of climate change, almost 300% debt to GDP by the end of the century. And I know he's a fiscally responsible Conservative as I am, and he would not want to burden future generations with this level of debt.
Peter Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister will, of course, know that one of the reasons why Britain's emissions are so low now is because we've exported most of our filthy, polluting manufacturing industries to poorer nations of the world. So those countries have been polluted in order to provide for our lifestyle. But it's almost 9 years now since world leaders agreed to establish a climate change impacts loss and damage mechanism. Last year, the Scottish Government led the world in committing millions of pounds to that mechanism. When does the United Kingdom Government intend to follow Scotland's lead?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the honourable gentleman will know, that at COP26 we agreed the Glasgow Dialogue on Loss and Damage. First time we had significant text in the cover decision on this issue. That work is going forward, as is work on the operationalisation of the Santiago network.
Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, of course, as we urgently seek to combat climate change, it's vital that we do so in a just and fair way, particularly for communities in the north east of Scotland. So bearing that in mind, does he agree with me that his government should do three things? Firstly, fund the Acorn carbon capture underground storage project. Secondly, match fund the Scottish Government's £500 million Just Transition Fund. And thirdly, finally, eventually, reform the Tenuos grid charging scandal that is happening at this moment in time.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman has eloquently raised a number of domestic policy issues, and I know that the Energy Minister would be happy to write to him on all of them.
Shadow President Ed Miliband.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the recent IPCC climate assessment was deeply worrying. It says current global policies would lead to warming of over 3 degrees, but it offered hope in the dramatic fall in the price of renewables, which means it's now the right choice for cheap energy and to tackle the climate crisis. Given onshore wind is the cheapest, cleanest, quickest power to deliver and is also supported by large majorities of the public in the UK, can the President explain why the government persists, including in its recent strategy, with planning policies that effectively block onshore wind in England?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I certainly agree that we need to be doing more in terms of renewables, and that's what the energy security strategy is all about. We already have 14 gigawatts deployed across the country. There is another 5.8 which is consented in the pipeline. And with regard to future developments, what we have said is that we want to work in partnership with supportive communities to host these new onshore wind farms, and in return they will enjoy the benefits such as local energy discounts.
He knows, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister caved in to those who said they wanted to block onshore wind, and I think the Energy Minister knows it too. Let's try him on another. To tackle the cost of living crisis and the climate emergency, energy efficiency measures are a no-brainer. But the Chancellor steadfastly refused to offer a penny more for energy efficiency in the recent strategy, meaning higher bills for people and more people in fuel poverty. Now, the President is responsible for holding departments to account for net zero. Isn't it time, Mr. Speaker, for him to wield some presidential power, knock heads together and sort this problem out?
Mr. Speaker, the issue of cost of living obviously is facing very many families across the country in all of our constituencies, and that's why the government has put forward over £9 billion worth of support on the cost of living issue. With relation specifically to energy efficiency, he knows that we're investing over £6.6 billion over this Parliament to improve energy efficiency and decarbonise heat, and of course that will lead to lower bills, particularly for those most in need.
Duncan Baker.
Question number 4, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Forest Declaration is an unprecedented commitment from 141 countries, covering 90% of global forests, to halt and reverse deforestation by 2030. It's underpinned by $16 billion of public and private finance, by sustainable trade and by support for Indigenous people's rights. And we're working very closely with endorsers to implement it.
Baker.
Can I thank the Minister for recently visiting my constituency? She will know that North Norfolk is blanketed with ancient forests and woodlands, and it's therefore very encouraging to know that woodland coverage is increasing across the UK and that this government is committed to preventing forest loss. Could the Minister update us on in the House on what progress she's making to increase woodland wildlife levels as well?
I thank him for that, and it was a pleasure to visit his wonderful constituency, and great as ever to hear about his precious ancient woodland in North Norfolk. We're acting on increasing wildlife in woodland in many ways. Through the environment, government has committed to halt species abundance decline by 2030, and we're using the Nature for Climate Fund to accelerate tree planting that improves biodiversity, and we're increasing funding to bring woodlands into active management, which is fundamental to enhancing and conserving wildlife.
Anna McMorrell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know that deforestation is causing huge issues for Indigenous people across the world. What more can the government be putting pressure on these governments worldwide, particularly Brazil, to prevent this deforestation from companies who are operating here in the UK?
Minister.
I thank her for that. She raises a vital point that we're fully aware of. That's why 140 countries signed that commitment to halt and reverse forest loss and land degradation at Glasgow. But also this government has itself brought through a due diligence clause in the Environment Act, so we're making our businesses look at sustainability of their forest products. So we're leading by example, but we've got a great deal more to do to work around the globe to stop deforestation.
We now come to topical Dr. James Davies.
Topical question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
President.
Mr. Speaker, the IPCC's latest report, published this month, makes clear that the window to limit average global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees is closing alarmingly fast. We need to make faster progress, and so the UK is continuing to urge all governments, but particularly the G20, to honour the promises made in the Glasgow Climate Pact. We're also working to get finance flowing to climate action, and last month I co-chaired a meeting of G7 ministers, multilateral development banks and the private sector on expanding just energy transition partnerships to support developing nations, and I will today travel to the World Bank spring meetings to drive this work forward.
Sir James Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What steps is my right honourable friend taking to ensure that rising international gas prices do not push back up the use of coal?
Mr. Speaker, at COP26, all countries agreed to phase down the use of coal domestically, and will continue to urge them to deliver on this commitment. I have to say that as a result of the current energy security and pricing issues, I do believe we will see an acceleration of renewables and clean energy capacity globally.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To keep the hope of 1.5 alive, 28 billion tonnes of emissions need to be taken out by 2030. What steps is he taking to advance Green New Deals like the Bio-Yorkshire project so they can get on and bring that new technology forward?
President.
Mr. Speaker, as the Honourable Lady will know, the Government is providing a significant amount of investment in new technologies, and as I've just referenced in response to an earlier question, the CFD auction process is one very good way of doing that.
Michael Longate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Brazil announced strong environmental commitments at COP26 that exceeded expectations. My own visit to Brazil after COP26 reconfirmed that Brazil is experiencing an economy-wide shift towards lower carbon emissions. Will the President provide this House with his own observations following his own recent visit, and will he agree that Brazil also has much to offer the rest of the world in terms of renewable energy, especially where ethanol-based technologies are concerned?
Mr. Speaker, may I commend my honourable friend for his work as the UK's trade envoy to Brazil. He's doing a brilliant job. During my recent visit, I encouraged the government to formally submit its 2030 emission reduction targets of 50% to the UNFCCC. It's done that now, and we also discussed Brazil's plan for a significant expansion of renewables, and I offered to share the UK's experience on expanding our own offshore wind sector.
Morris.
This month, a set of floating wind projects under Carillion Winds worth a potential $10 billion was announced, alongside a memorandum of understanding with wind turbine manufacturer Lamprell. Unfortunately, most of the fabrication work for these projects seems to be destined to be carried out in the United Arab Emirates. Does the Minister agree with me, the GMB union and other manufacturing unions, that we must do better to build back better, greener and provide UK-based manufacturing jobs?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank you for that question. And of course, floating offshore wind is a key part of the energy security strategy announced by the Prime Minister last week, with a 5-gigawatt target ambition by 2030. In terms of securing and improving the UK supply chain, floating offshore wind is still a relatively nascent technology, but I will make sure that I take the point he raises to the supply chain task force.
Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Foreign Secretary writes her international development strategy, what conversations is the President having about the importance of international climate finance for the very poorest countries in the world?
President.
Mr. Speaker, as she raised a very important point, of course we need to make sure we honour the $100 billion pledge, but as I said earlier, we're also ensuring that we work with countries to ensure they have funding for energy, clean energy transition, and as I said, I'm off to the World Bank meetings shortly to take that work forward.
Lawrence Session-Lomi. Florence, Topical 5.
Sorry.
Question.
Number 5.
Question. Stop it. We'll move on. Listening Buchan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that in order to achieve net zero by 2050, we need to transition from North Sea oil and gas? But very importantly, this is a transition and not an extinction, as many parties opposite are calling for.
Well, I think my honourable friend is absolutely right, Mr. Speaker. It is vital that we have a North Sea transition. That is the purpose of the government's North Sea transition deal. That is what we are delivering on with the sector. Some parties opposite want to see an extinction. That would not be in the nation's interest and would only lead to a rise in imported hydrocarbons, which is also not in our interest at this time.
British Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, does the Minister realise he's guilty of being too nice? We don't even just need where's the plan, Stan? We need where's the money, honey? Why doesn't he get in number 11, shake the Chancellor of the Exchequer till his teeth rattle, and get the money that he should be putting into environmental concerns and saving our planet?
Mr. Speaker, I just say to the honourable gentleman that Since March 2021 and through the 2021 budget and spending review, the government has committed a total of £30 billion of domestic investment for the green industrial revolution. And not only that, Mr. Speaker, but we are ensuring that many tens of billions of pounds of private investment also flows into green transition.
Philip Dunn.
Is extraction of fossil fuels from new oil and gas fields consistent with meeting our climate change commitments during the transition?
Mr. Speaker, as I've said, what we want to see is a managed transition, and that is not going to happen overnight. He will also know that we've set out in our domestic energy security strategy that future licensing rounds will have to be compatible with the climate compatibility checkpoint, which will be set out shortly.
Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, I would like to point out that a British Sign Language interpretation of proceedings is available to watch on Parliament Live TV. We now come to questions to the Prime Minister. Dr Neil Hudson.
Question 1, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I know the whole House will want to join me in wishing Her Majesty the Queen a very happy birthday for tomorrow. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today. I will then be travelling to India to deepen the strategic trade, defence and people-to-people ties between our two countries, building on India's involvement in the Carbis Bay G7 summit. I'll be seeing Prime Minister Modi in Delhi, meeting Indian business people investing in the UK and visiting British investments in India.
Dr Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Challenges with rural transport remain some of the greatest obstacles facing people in Penrith and the border, and I was pleased last year to see, on top of the government's £3 billion national bus strategy helping areas like Cumbria, that Cumbria County Council received an additional £1.5 million to enhance provision as part of the Rural Mobility Fund. But I'm sure my right honourable friend can only imagine my disappointment this month when Cumbria was allocated no funding from the latest tranche of bus funding. Can the Prime Minister reassure my constituents that Cumbria can look forward to future funding schemes to improve our vital rural bus services?
Prime Minister.
Okay, Mike, I thank my honourable friend. He is a great champion for rural Cumbria and for bus services, and he's right that Cumbria got another £1.5 million. We do for buses. We do want to put more into buses. I believe in them passionately myself, and I will make sure that he has a meeting with the relevant minister.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister in wishing Her Majesty a happy birthday? Why did the Prime Minister's Press Secretary, Allegra Stratton, have to resign from her job?
Minister.
Sorry. I bitterly regret Allegra's resignation. I think it was very sad, and I think she did an outstanding job. But I do, particularly since she was the one who coined the expression coal, cars, cash and trees, which enabled the UK to deliver a fantastic COP26 summit last year.
Keir Starmer.
Allegra Stratton laughed at breaking the rules. She resigned. The Prime Minister then claimed he was furious at her behaviour and accepted her resignation. Professor Neil Ferguson broke the rules. He also resigned. The Prime Minister said that was the right thing to do. The former Health Secretary broke the rules. He too resigned. The Prime Minister tried to claim he sacked him. Why does the Prime Minister think everybody else's actions have consequences except his own?
I thank the right honourable gentleman. I feel he's in some kind of Doctor Who time warp. We had this conversation yesterday, Mr. Speaker, and I've explained why I bitterly regret receiving an FPN. I apologise to the House. But he asks about the actions for which I take responsibility. And I'll tell him we're going to get on with delivering for the British people, making sure and making sure that we power out of the problems that COVID has left us, and more people in work than there were before the pandemic, Mr. Speaker, fixing our energy problems, and leading the world in standing up to the aggression of Vladimir Putin. Those are all subjects about which I think he could reasonably ask questions now.
These are strange answers from a man who yesterday claimed to be making a humble apology. Does the Prime Minister actually accept that he broke the law?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I've been absolutely clear that I humbly accept what the police have said. I've paid the fixed penalty notice. And, Mr. Speaker, what I think the country and what I think the whole House would really rather do is get on with the things for which we were elected, deliver on our promises to the British people. And you could not have clearer evidence of the intellectual bankruptcy of Labour. They have no plans. They have no plans for energy. They have no plans for social care, and they have no plans, Mr. Speaker, to fix the economy.
Prime Minister, sit down. I want to hear what you've got to say, but I can't hear when you're talking that way. I'm here in the chair. Please, if you can help me. No, I think we'll have had enough.
The state of it, the party of Peel and Churchill reduced to shouting and screaming in defence of this lawbreaker.
Now then, that's the last time. That Peroni that you just asked about, you might have to go and take it. I don't hear any more, or else you will be drinking. Keir Starmer.
So, Mr. Speaker, yesterday's apology lasted for as long as the Prime Minister thought necessary to be clipped for the news. But once the cameras were off, the Prime Minister went to see his backbenchers, and he was back to blaming everyone else. He even said that the Archbishop of Canterbury had not been critical enough of Putin. In fact, the Archbishop called Putin's war an act of great evil, and the Church of England has led the way in providing refuge to those fleeing. Would the Prime Minister like to take this opportunity to apologise for slandering the Archbishop and the Church of England?
Mr. Speaker, I think the right honourable gentleman. I was slightly taken aback to be Sorry, Mr. Speaker. I was slightly taken aback for the government to be criticised over the policy that we have devised to end the deaths at sea in the Channel as a result of cruel criminal gangs. I was surprised that we were attacked for that. And actually, Mr. Speaker, it turns out that that policy, do you know who proposed that policy, first of all, in 2004? It was David Blunkett, Mr. Speaker, who said it was a 21st, yes it was, and she'll remember, a 21st century solution to the problems of illegal asylum seeking and immigration. He should stick with, he's a Corbynister in a smart Islington suit. That's the truth.
I think you'll find Mr. Corbyn doesn't have the whip. But I think that's a no then. Pathetic. He never takes responsibility for his words or action. They were all there. The Prime Minister also accused the BBC of not being critical enough of Putin. Would the Prime Minister have the guts to say that to the face of Clive Myrie, Lise Doucet and Steve Rosenberg, who have all risked their lives day in, day out on the front line in Russia and Ukraine, uncovering Putin's barbarism?
If the right honourable gentleman wants to join the Conservative Party and come and listen to the meetings of the Conservative Party, he's welcome to do it. But as I say, I think he's a Corbynister in an Islington suit. But I said nothing of the kind. And I have the highest admiration as a journalist and a former journalist for what journalists do. I think they do an outstanding. I mean, I think he should withdraw what he just said. It has absolutely no basis or foundation in truth.
Keir Starmer.
That's how he operates. A mealy-mouthed apology when the cameras roll, a vicious attack on those who tell the truth as soon as the cameras are off. Slander decent people in a private room, let the slander spread without the backbone to repeat it in public. How can the Prime Minister claim to be a patriot when he deliberately attacks and degrades the institutions of our great country?
Prime Minister, how many does he have? How many does he have? Mr. Speaker, sorry, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
No, premise, just a second. I want to hear the Prime Minister's answers. I expect it both ways. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it is an indication of the depths to which he's willing to sink. That he accuses me. He accuses me of traducing journalists. What he says is completely without any foundation whatever. I did not attack the BBC last night for their coverage of Ukraine. He must be out of his tiny mind, Mr. Speaker. He must be out of his tiny mind. I said no such thing, and there are people behind who will testify to that. He is completely wrong, Mr. Speaker. That is the limit. That is the limit of his willingness to ask sensible questions today. We are getting on. This government is getting on with the serious problems that require attention. Fixing our energy supply issues, and by the way, undoing the damage of the Labour government that didn't invest in nuclear power for 13 years. We're with a nuclear power station every year. Standing up to Putin, Mr. Speaker, when he would have elected a Putin apologist. That's what he wanted to do, and he campaigned to do that. Mr. Speaker, and fixing our economy with record numbers of people now in work, productivity back above what it was, more than 500,000 people back on the payroll than there were before the pandemic began, Mr. Speaker. That is as a result of the decisions, the tough calls this government has made. We get on with the job while they flip-flop around like beached flounders on the beach, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Founded in Hitchin by an inspirational man called Richard Lucas, the GoVox mental well-being platform was started in 2018 following the sad loss of some local young men to suicide. Since then, working with brilliant partners like NHSX, King's College London and others, the technology platform and support services have grown to support the mental well-being and mental health of over 40,000 young people in over 10 countries. Today, GoVox is launching its campaign to offer its services free to over 1,000 state secondary schools. Would the Prime Minister welcome this initiative, perhaps go to Hitchin and meet the people from GoVox? And secondly, could he set out what more we can do to help young people and young men with the problems of mental health and mental well-being?
Prime Minister.
Yeah. I thank him very much. I thank my honourable friend. I'm very pleased to hear about the work that GoVox is doing to support mental health and well-being, and we're putting more money into mental health care support, an extra £2.3 billion a year in the next financial year, which of course we can supply thanks to the decisions taken by this government, which actually that party opposed.
We now come to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister and Leader of the Opposition in wishing Her Majesty the Queen best wishes for her birthday tomorrow? Mr. Speaker, last night the Prime Minister might have convinced his backbenchers and his spineless Scottish Tories to keep him in place for another few weeks. But the public aren't so easily fooled. 82% of people in Scotland said they believe the Prime Minister lied to this Parliament and to the public about his law-breaking COVID parties. Are they right? Or should they not believe their lying eyes?
Prime Minister.
I thank the right honourable gentleman. We had a long conversation about this yesterday. I understand the point of his question, but we are going to get on with the job of delivering for the people of the whole of the United Kingdom.
If the Prime Minister wants to get on, he should be offering his resignation to the Queen before her birthday. Mr. Speaker, no government can be led by a Prime Minister who's in a constant state of crisis to save his own skin. And what's worse, the UK government is now led by a tag team of scandal, a Prime Minister who can't be trusted with the truth, and a Chancellor who can't be trusted with his taxes. Everyone knows that this Prime Minister is now on borrowed time until the Tory backbenchers count the cost of their council election defeat. But in the meantime, families are counting the cost of a Tory-made cost of living crisis every day. After yesterday's farce, isn't it finally the time for him to accept that neither his party or the public can afford to keep him around as Prime Minister for 1 minute longer?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, if that were true, then I don't think he'd be calling for my resignation. That's what we're going to do is get on with the job in hand, and that is deliver for the entire people of this country. And by the way, Mr. Speaker, he hasn't answered the point I made yesterday, which is I think is still incredible that at a time when we need to stand up to aggression from Vladimir Putin, it is still the policy of the Scottish Nationalist Party to get rid of this country's unilateral defence.
We have a closed question, Philip Holloway.
Number 3, sir.
I thank my honourable friend. He's an excellent champion for Kettering, and we're fully committed to the delivery of the new hospital for Kettering. The release of funding will be subject to the usual business case assessment process.
The redevelopment of Kettering General Hospital is the #1 local priority for residents in Kettering and across Northamptonshire. Would my right honourable friend be kind enough, please, to facilitate a meeting with the Health Secretary for the 3 members for Kettering, Wellingborough, Corby, together with the Hospital Chief Executive, so that we can trigger the start of the drawdown of the initial £46 million worth of funding?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, told me that he's met them before and he's happy to meet them again.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Yfarydd. Plaid Cymru have been calling for 15 years for a law to ban politicians from being willfully misleading. New polling by Compassion in Politics shows that 73% of people support such a law. Will the Prime Minister support a lying in politics bill?
Mr. Speaker, it is well known that the rules of this House demand that we tell the truth in this House, and that's what we all try to do.
Nick Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. PMQs for a constituency MP like me is a wonderful opportunity to ask the Prime Minister for a new hospital for Doncaster, maybe. Or maybe for Doncaster to be the home of Great British Rail headquarters. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, there is a more pressing issue, and that is that men are dying so much younger than they should. So will the Prime Minister meet with me to discuss the merits of having a Minister for Men and the benefits of a men's health strategy? That way, the next time I am fortunate enough to get a PMQ, I can lobby the Prime Minister for a new hospital for Doncaster and for Doncaster to be the home of Great British Rail headquarters.
Prime Minister.
I thank my friend, honourable friend, very much for his work in this area. And we are determined to tackle all the health conditions that he's describes and cares about, particularly mental health and suicide prevention. And I note his plea for a new hospital. I know it's one that's shared by many colleagues on these benches. This is the government that is funding that, making it possible, thanks to the decisions we've taken, allowing our economy to grow, which would not have been possible if we'd listened to them, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On this side, not only do we believe that lawbreakers can't be lawmakers, but also that tax raisers should be taxpayers. And when people in powerful positions pick and choose where they pay their taxes, that's an insult to everyone else who doesn't have that luxury. So can I ask the Prime Minister, how many members of his cabinet have ever been involved in a tax avoidance scheme?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what we try to do in this government is cut taxes for the whole country, and I'm proud to say that what the Chancellor did in the recent spring statement by lifting the threshold for national insurance contributions was to have a tax cut for about £330 for most people in this country. That's a fantastic thing.
Sarah Atherton.
Mr. Speaker, if you live in North Wales and want to watch international sport, you have to travel 4 hours to Cardiff or Swansea.
Shocking.
The Wrexham Racecourse, with its historic Cop stand, is home to Wembley-bound Wrexham Football Club. It's the oldest international stadium in the world and forms part of our Levelling Up Fund bid. Would the Prime Minister agree that round 2 of the Levelling Up Fund offers an excellent opportunity to level up access to sport?
Well, there could be no better campaigner for Wrexham and for the interests of Wrexham sport. I will do what I can, Mr. Speaker, but she'll know that 121 million from the first round of the Levelling Up Fund was awarded to Wales, and I'm sure that Wrexham has every chance of success in the future.
Christian Wakeford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has been asked about sodium valproate scandal previously, but Sean Linton at the Sunday Times this weekend revealed that campaigners were blacklisted, including my constituent Emma Murphy, who is here in the gallery today. Advice from the Cumberledge report has been ignored, warnings are still not on medication as of a couple of weeks ago, and a redress scheme is still not forthcoming. Will the Prime Minister meet with me and campaigners like Emma to discuss what can be done to right this incredible wrong?
Prime Minister.
I thank you very much for raising the point. I understand that we've had a review already of the issue, but I'll make sure that he has a proper meeting, or he and the campaigners that he mentions have a proper meeting with the relevant minister in the Health Department.
Yeah. Robert Jenry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Aidan Aslin has served in the Ukrainian Armed Forces for 4 years. Last week, he was captured by the Russian army in Mariupol. Yesterday, a video emerged of my constituent handcuffed, physically injured, and being interviewed under duress for propaganda purposes. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that this is a flagrant breach of the Geneva Convention, that treating any prisoner of war in this manner is illegal, and that the interviewer, Graham Phillips, is in danger of prosecution for war crimes, and that any online platform, such as YouTube, which hosts propaganda videos of this kind, should take them down immediately?
I thank my right honourable friend very much, and I think everybody will want to will urge the Russian state to treat his constituent humanely and compassionately, because in my view, although we do not encourage people, in fact we actively dissuade people from going to that theatre of conflict, I understand that he'd been serving in the Ukrainian forces for some time, and his situation was very different from that of a mercenary, Mr. Speaker. I hope that he is treated with care and compassion. I thoroughly echo the sentiments that my right honourable friend has expressed about those who broadcast propaganda messages.
James Murray.
Mr. Speaker, this Conservative government is raising taxes on working people in the middle of a cost of living crisis. So can I press the Prime Minister on whether he agrees that it would add insult to injury if his Chancellor or any other government ministers were to benefit from overseas tax havens in their personal tax affairs?
Mr. Speaker. Good point, Mr. Speaker, but we are responsible for cutting taxes for everybody, which is what we're actually doing.
Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Newcastle-under-Lyme is receiving over £50 million of government investment into our High Street and the High Street in Kidsgrove, in my honourable friend's neighbouring constituency. But it's all being overshadowed by the ongoing environmental disaster at Wally's Quarry. In January, the operator was hit by 3 Category 1 breaches by the Environment Agency. My constituents are utterly sick of it. It's been going on for far too long, Prime Minister. We need to see tougher enforcement. We need to see the permit taken away. What hope can you give my constituents? How can we stop the stink?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my honourable friend has raised this issue before. And I know how infuriating it is for his constituents. That's why my right honourable friend, the Environment Secretary, has now ordered action against the site operator, and permanent capping will begin on site next month. I can tell him that will improve things for thousands of residents in his constituency, and if it is necessary to take further action to remove these malodorous vapours, Mr. Speaker, then we will.
Ruth Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With details of the Sougray report trickling out, a flood of photos of Partygate yet to be released, and any number of fixed penalty notices liable to be leaked, this is a Prime Minister that's not fit to run a bath, never mind this. It's time for him to stop this ridiculous charade that he believes no rules were broken. So will he commit to making public every fixed penalty notice he receives? Will he publish the party photos taken by the official photographer and ensure Sougray's report is published at the earliest opportunity? We have a right to know the truth.
Well, Mr. Speaker, on the my own fixed penalty notice, I've been transparent with the House. I apologise. On the rest of it, and will be, Mr. Speaker. But on the rest of it, I really think, as I've said before, that the House should wait to the conclusion of the investigation when Sougray will be finally reporting.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Long ago, in a far-off place, thousands of British servicemen sailed into what for them was the unknown as they witnessed the early tests of nuclear weapons. They've lived with the consequence of the service to our nation ever since. Following a PMQ from the Honourable Member for Salford, the Prime Minister has agreed to meet me and her and those veterans. But will he now assure the House that he will take personal charge of the decision on whether to grant the remaining servicemen, for there are few left, the service medal they so richly deserve?
Prime Minister.
I thank him very much. I thank my right honourable friend very much. I thank him for campaigning on this issue, which I know attracts support across the House, and I certainly will take personal charge of the matter myself and make sure that they receive the recognition they deserve.
Liz Twist.
Mr. Speaker, my constituents across Blaydon knew the rules and stuck to the rules. Nurses and teachers included. No after-work drinks for them. The Prime Minister set these rules. Night after night, he was on national TV to exhort us to stick to the rules for everyone's sake. Yet he continues to say that he doesn't think he broke any rules. My constituents are angry that while they stuck to the law, the Prime Minister broke it. Trust in his government is broken. So when will he go?
Mr. Speaker, I understand the feelings of her constituents, and I continue to express my apologies for the FPN that I received. But what the government is going to do is get on with tackling the issues that face this country and delivering for the British people, and that is my priority.
Robert Butlin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of my constituents, like many others across our country, has been helping directly with the humanitarian effort in Ukraine and the region, and he received a most troubling message from a resident of the city of Kherson only days ago, and I quote from part of it. "There are no green corridors for evacuation. People are trying to flee the city at their own risk under fire. The Russians are living in our homes. They are plotting terror, robbing, harassing, kidnapping and killing our people, doing whatever they want." Mr. Speaker, what more can my right honourable friend and the international community do to ensure that Putin and those who do his bidding are brought to justice for their crimes?
Prime Minister.
Well, I think that my right honourable friend is making an incredibly important point, because the savagery that the Russians are now unleashing on Ukraine clearly knows no limits and is clearly authorised from the very top. And she asked what more we can do. I think what we need to do is make it clear to serving officers now in the Russian forces that they will, if we can proceed with the international criminal prosecutions that we want to see, they will eventually face justice in the way that those who participated in massacres in Bosnia faced justice in the past. And I hope, Mr. Speaker, that will have a chilling effect on their current appalling conduct.
Nick Smith.
Mr. Speaker,
Every week, examples emerge of government waste during COVID. And last year, the former Health Secretary told me that there'd be no profiteering and no cronyism. Does the Prime Minister still agree with him?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think that a lot of people made money, I'm sad to say, out of COVID in a way that perhaps they shouldn't have done. And we deplore that, and we are trying to recoup as much as we possibly can. But I would just remind him of the constant clamour from those benches and around the country for us to equip our country with PPE, with medicines as fast as possible. And that we did, Mr. Speaker.
Russell. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Prime Minister join me in thanking the brilliant staff and volunteers at Watford General Hospital for their tireless work for our community over many years? And would he agree with me that we should get started as soon as possible on the ambitious plans put forward by West Herts Hospital Trust as part of the new hospital programme to transform healthcare across our whole community so staff and patients can access world-class health services in facilities fit for the 21st century? And, Mr. Speaker, if I may add, the ambitious plans are truly shovel-ready. I will gladly go and buy a shovel today to get started.
Mr. Speaker, he is a fantastic champion for Watford, and he's been. I know that because I've been to see him several times. He's been campaigning on this issue to get a hospital in Watford ever since he was triumphantly elected, and he's going to be successful because there will be a new hospital scheme in his local area, and it's part of our plan to deliver 48 new hospitals in this country by 2030, Mr. Speaker.
Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister's fundamental political problem at the moment isn't about parties or fixed penalty notices or cake. It's about the lack of trust, integrity and credibility at the heart of government, which he himself now personifies. Mr. Speaker, when is the Prime Minister going to realise that people don't want to hear any more glib, half-hearted non-apologies or hear him witter on about getting on with the job? They just want this Pinocchio Prime Minister to pack his bags and go.
Mr. Speaker, I think when are the Scottish people going to hear any... sorry, Mr. Speaker, when are the Scottish people going to hear an ounce of sense from the Scottish Nationals?
Prime Minister, we both can't stand up at the same time. I'm trying to be helpful. We've got to be more moderate in taunting language use. Pinocchio is not acceptable. I'm sure the member wishes to withdraw it quickly.
Mr. Speaker, I withdraw that, but he packs his bags and goes.
Minister.
It's not a withdrawal.
Withdrawn it. Sorry, you've withdrawn it. You're with it. Let's get on. Prime Minister, withdraw. Is that are you answering anything?
Sorry, I don't know what his question is, Mr. Speaker. He's withdrawn it, but the answer is that we're going to get on the job. Get on with the job. It'd be nice to hear an ounce of sense from the Scottish Nationalist Party or some competent government.
Rhys Villiers.
The London Borough of Barnes is surrounded by Labour councils, all of which have higher council tax and have abandoned weekly bin collections. So will the Prime Minister urge everyone to come out on the 5th of May and vote Conservative in order to keep council tax lower than Labour and to protect our weekly bin collection?
Quite right, Mr. Speaker. Conservative councils fix 4 times more potholes, recycle twice as much, and Conservative councils, Mr. Speaker, charge less.
Tom Hopkins.
Mr. Speaker, the Ministerial Code states that ministers have a duty to comply with the law and to protect the integrity of public life. The Prime Minister has broken the law and repeatedly shown contempt for the British public. Conservative MPs opposite seem content to decry the principles of honesty and integrity as they unashamedly defend him. The public want him gone, we want him gone. When will he do the right thing and resign?
Mr. Speaker, I know why they want me gone, because this government is going to get on. We are going to get on and show why this Conservative government is going to deliver for the British people, fixing our cost of living issues, making sure that we solve our long-term energy problems, and delivering on everything that we promised to do, Mr. Speaker. And they have absolutely no plan. That's the difference.
David Evan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
On these benches, we were elected to make the most of our Brexit freedoms, including they don't like it, Mr. Speaker, they don't like it, but including tackling immigration, illegal immigration, securing our borders and crack down on the evil people smuggling trade. Does my right honourable friend agree that our groundbreaking partnership with Rwanda will do just that?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, I think it is a part of the solution. And it's something that, as I said just now, was advocated in 2004 by the then Home Secretary David Blunkett, a Blairite Home Secretary. It's now attacked in the most ludicrous terms by the current Labour opposition, who are obviously, as I've just said, Corbynistas in Islington suits.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wondered what the Prime Minister makes of this quote. When a regime has been in power too long, when it has fatally exhausted the patience of the people, and when oblivion finally beckons, across the world, you can rely on leaders of that regime to act solely in the interests of self-preservation and not in the interests of the electorate. His words, Mr. Speaker, Daily Telegraph, 28th of February 2011. Does he still agree? Yes or no?
Mr. Speaker, all I can say is that I'm delighted that she's a reader of the Daily Telegraph. I think what she needs to do is keep going to the end of the article. That's my advice to her.
We now come to the 10-minute rule bill.
Barry Sherman, please.
Let's just let the room clear. Just. I'd sit down a minute, Tim.
Your office got to me very quickly. I don't know how they found out.
Because I sent the message.
Yeah, and
Thank you. Brilliant.
Sent them the numbers.
Then I'm going on. Right, I've got a point of order. We'll start with Sir David Evanet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On these benches, on these benches, we strongly believe in the BBC and believe that it does a great job, especially on reporting from the Ukraine. The suggestion from the Leader of the Opposition that the Prime Minister suggested somewhat differently at last night's meeting, which I attended, is absolutely inaccurate. And the Leader of the Opposition to retract that because he's misled the House.
I wasn't there. It would be impossible to comment on something I didn't know. Yes, but I think it's more for my judgment, and I don't know. But I'll certainly look into the matter, and thank you. Point of order, Boris Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, I know that all of us in this House are fair game to the media, and all of us enjoy many of the political commentators and sketch writers. But, Mr. Speaker, this morning's edition of The Times carried a Quentin Letts article which I believe was sexist, misogynistic and totally unacceptable. And the way that he described, not what she said, but what our honourable friend, the member for West Ham, it was about everything about the substance of any speech. It was cruel, it was disgraceful, and I don't know what we can do about it, but Quentin Letts specialises in that misogynistic approach, especially women in this chamber. Is it time that we withdrew his parliamentary press pass?
No, in a nutshell, what I would say is that I do expect, and quite rightly, as you've raised the matter, it's not a point of order for the Chair. You've certainly put it on the record. What I would say is I think it is important that it is about tolerance and moderate language. But in fairness, the freedom of the press, and I've taken the hits on some of it as well, and the good honourable member himself was also what I would say. I think there is a level, and we all judge that level, and you've judged it to go beyond, and I do accept that, and that's why you put it on the record, and I think for that purpose we'll leave it there. Who's that?
Robert Halfon.
Robert Halfon, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You'll be aware of the incident with the member for Harrow when he was driving through. Can
I just say, I'm well aware of it. I've had a discussion. I've got a meeting coming later. I'd certainly not raise on the floor of the House the issue of security at the moment. I will sooner have that meeting first, and then by all means, if we aren't satisfied, I'll come back. There's some information I don't want to come. I'd sooner leave the security issue because it was a worry and it's a problem, and I'd sooner not air it here until I've met with the 3 members concerned, more than one. But a general point, I don't want to open up security.
If it's possible, would you look at having a police officer outside the gate as people drive in, not just inside the gate?
Well, once again, I don't want to be brought into a security issue about that. I want to leave it there. I think it's better we do. And please come and see me privately, and we can certainly have a discussion. Right, let us now try and come to the 10-minute rule bill. Harriet Baldwin.
Yeah. Thank you very much.